and gentlemen, please stand for the Lord Mayor of Cork, Chief Executive and elected members of Cork City Council.
Good evening, everyone. You're all very welcome to the special meeting of Cork City Council. We'll now have the safety announcement.
In the interests of safety, I would ask you to note the position of and access to the exit from this council chamber. There is one exit on entrance to the public galleries. In the event of an emergency, please walk quickly to the exit, directly down the stairs, and make your way outside, following the instructions of staff members to the appropriate assembly point. Do not delay, do not return, unless and until you are advised that it is safe to do so. I would appreciate if everybody could turn their phones to silent, please.
We'll now proceed with the roll call.
Cork Gould, Vera, Cork Collins, Cork Ryan, Cork Boylan, Cork Bowe, Cork Desmond, Cork Shannon, Cork Ford, Cork Nickfin, Cork Boyle, Cork Martin, Cork Deneen, Cork Curtin, Cork Dennehy, Cork Kenton, Cork Clifton, Cork Colin Keller, Cork Garda Keller, Cork Maloney, and Cork Brennan.
So we have a quorum. So we might ask you now to stand for a prayer and a moment of reflection. Directly we beseech thee, O Lord, thy actions by thy holy grace and inspiration, that every work of ours may be from thee and by thee, through Christ our Lord. Thank you. I would just like to welcome everybody here this evening. It's a special meeting of Cork City Council to commemorate a very special period in time. This is 100 years since the first council met in 1920. I particularly like to welcome former Lord Mayors of Cork, who are sitting over my right-hand side, and a very intimidating bunch that they are. And also ministers, and a special welcome to the Coherach of the Shannon, Senator Dennis O'Donovan, who's taken the time to be here this evening to represent the Oireachtas. I'd also like to welcome members of the Expert Advisory Group who have been very supportive in our planning our commemorations this year, in particular Dr. Martin Mansfer, who's taken the time to travel here today. I'd like to welcome the Chief of Staff of the Defence Forces, Mark Mellett, along with Brigadier General Patrick Flynn and Commodore Mike Malone. I'd like to welcome members of the Garda Siochana, representatives from the Department of An Taoiseach, officials from the Department of Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht, officials from the Department of Tourism, Transport and Sport, and most especially, I would like to welcome representatives of the family members of the first council that was elected in 1920. This is a special honour to have representatives of the family here today. Tá fearfáilte rómh go léir go halla cáilaf as an ógtar speisialta seo, is mór nóir dom bheith seo live anocht. I'd also like to welcome the Reverend Bishops and former councillors and also my fellow councillors, along with everyone else who's taken the time to travel here this evening, and in the adjoining rooms and in the atrium downstairs. It's a great honour and privilege for me to welcome you all here to City Hall on this special meeting of Cork City Council, where we remember the first Republican Council that met here a century ago this evening. 1920 was a momentous and significant year for Cork and for Ireland in its struggle for independence. In January 1920, local elections were held in Cork and the first Republican Council was formed. This evening we mark the centenary of the formation of that council and of the election of Tomás McCurtain as Lord Mayor of Cork. Tonight's event is the first of a series of 1920 commemorations where we commemorate many significant events that happened in Cork during this period. The election of Tomás McCurtain, the first Republican Council, the election of the franchise being extended to women for the first time proportional representation was used, the election of Terence McSweeney following the death and murder of Tomás McCurtain, and then the death of Terence McSweeney on hunger strike, and then also the burning of Cork. During my term as Lord Mayor, I had the opportunity of visiting over 130 schools in the newly expanded city, and I had the opportunity to engage with pupils, staff and students in those colleges. And in recognition of 100 years of school visits, we presented every school with a photograph or a picture of Tomás McCurtain and Terence McSweeney. The same picture is an etchings which are in the Lord Mayor's chambers. And it was very clear from engaging with those schools the interest, the connection and the emotion that people felt for this period in history. There was a story at nearly every school that we had the honour of visiting of someone who was linked in some way, shape or form to that period in time. Today is a special day for this council and this city, as 100 years ago this council voted to recognise Dáil Éireann as the legitimate government of Ireland. And I would like to thank and to acknowledge the Coherent of the Seanad, Senator Dennis O'Donovan, who is representing the houses of the Oireachtas this evening. 1920 was also a period of revolution and change, not just in Ireland, but right throughout Europe. It was a time where women and men fought for equality and where women won the right to vote for the first time, and it was a fight to win that right to vote. We remember this evening the first woman to be elected to Cork City Council, Annie Sutton, who came from Summerhill, where I grew up. It is also significant to reflect that 100 years after women achieved the franchise, there is for the first time in the upcoming general election a female candidate in every constituency in Ireland for the first time. And we wish some of them who are here this evening well. We're delighted to have among us this evening representatives from the trade union movement who had a pivotal role to play in the first council, representatives from 50-50 Women for Election, as well as Corlin and Og. As well as commemorating the events of 1920, we also need to look forward as a city and as a country. We need to embrace the Ireland of today and of the future. We especially welcome to City Hall tonight people from the four corners of the world who've made Ireland their home, and we welcome their participation in the commemorations this evening. It is a special privilege for me personally to hold the position of Lord Mayor in this centenary year, and I do have the honour of wearing the chain that was worn by Tomás McCurtain and Terence McSweeney and by so many other previous Lord Mayors right throughout the period of history. And I'm reminded every day of the sacrifices that they and many others made for our freedom. The rights that were hard fought for by the men and women of Cork 100 years ago had profound implications both nationally and internationally. We have as a council an obligation to continue the work and legacy of the brave men and women who a century ago led by their example. This evening's special meeting will consist of a number of different sections, and now I have the honour of introducing the Chief Archivist from the Cork City and County Library, or Archives, who will present the minutes of the first meeting of the Republican Council in 1920. Brian Mee. Thank you very much, Brian. As Brian was saying, that the minutes survived the burning of City Hall, the burning of Carnegie Library and the burning of Cork, so somebody had the foresight to take them home with them, perhaps, to write them up. You may notice that councillors, my fellow councillors, this evening are wearing a white rose, and this is in remembrance of Tomás McCurtain, who wore a white rose on the night of his election as Lord Mayor. St. Angela's College has a special connection with the events of 100 years ago. Maura McSweeney, the sister of Terence McSweeney, was arrested by Crown forces while teaching in St. Angela's College. And this evening, St. Angela's College is represented by Emily Gunn, a pupil from that school. Emily will now present the Lord Mayor with a white rose in recognition of the one worn at the first meeting of the Republican Council by Tomás McCurtain. I would now like to introduce Dr. John Borgovno from the School of History in UCC, who will speak on the events of that time, on the local elections of 1920, universal suffrage and the use of proportional representation, the Sinn Féin majority in Cork City Council and around the country, and the national picture, international context and the impacts of events of that time. Thank you, John.
Thank you. It's really an honor for me to be here. On this day, 100 years ago, the Cork Corporation swore allegiance to Dáil Éireann and raised the tricolour over City Hall. These revolutionary acts were undertaken by a multifaceted independence movement, which used different tactics to secure Irish self-determination. And it's easy to forget just how quickly Sinn Féin had seized power. A pre-war Sinn Féin party existed in Cork during 1909, but collapsed in 1913, as had pretty much every other branch of the party outside of Dublin. Prior to 1916, prominent Republican leaders like Tomás McCurtain, Terence McSweeney, Liam de Rochta, Donald O'Callaghan, and Mary McSweeney were largely unknown, and their independence project was considered daft and unrealistic. In the municipal elections of 1914, Republicans won a single seat compared to the 55 held by the two dominant constitutional nationalist parties, William O'Brien's All for Ireland League and John Redmond's Irish Party. Yet both those parties were crushed in January 1920. And you might ask what exactly changed politically in those 6 years. I would emphasize the defeat of constitutional nationalism during the Home Rule crisis, participation in an unpopular world war, and raised expectations for self-determination as a democratic revolution swept across Europe at war's end. The new Sinn Féin party was established in 1917 in Cork and elsewhere, and quickly dominated 3 of Ireland's 4 provinces. It laid out a very clear case for Irish self-determination, defied wartime suppression by the British authorities, and led effective mass civil resistance, which defeated military conscription in Ireland during 1918. In those months, the rank and file of the All for Ireland League defected en masse to Sinn Féin, while its 8 members of parliament disestablished the party and declined to stand for re-election. John Redmond's Irish Party attempted to retain power, but was overwhelmed in the 1918 general election. In the Cork City constituencies, its 2 candidates were rejected by a 2-to-1 vote margin, with Sinn Féin pulling in 66% of the vote total. Rather than take their seats in the House of Commons, the elected Sinn Féin representatives instead gathered at Mansion House, established Dáil Éireann, and declared national independence. The Republicans' primary strategy was to secure independence at the Paris Peace Conference, which was then redrawing the maps of Europe. Ireland had a strong claim to self-determination, and Sinn Féin's dramatic 1918 electoral victory gave it a clear mandate. It dispatched Dáil President Eamon de Valera to the United States to secure American support for Irish independence. Yet the Sinn Féin envoys to Paris were denied entree to the conference, as were representatives of other nationalities such as the Arabs, the Egyptians, and Vietnamese. And we must remember this international dimension to the Irish conflict. The British government felt that Irish independence would open the door to independence by other colonized people in Asia and Africa. The British Empire at this stage controlled 1/5 of the world's population. Its imperialist government could not risk that empire by giving major concessions to Ireland. Thus, by end of 1919, the Republicans' international strategy had been seen as failed. The 1920 municipal elections gave Sinn Féin an opportunity to peacefully resist the British state, while also demonstrating its capacity for orderly self-government. Beyond their endorsement of Irish independence, the Republican candidates ran on a progressive message emphasizing affordable housing, ending patronage and corruption in local government, and securing a living wage for its workers. To avoid splitting its strong working class support, Sinn Féin ran on a joint ticket with the left-wing trade union, the Irish Transport and General Workers Union. The ITGWU was Republican and had close connections to the independence movement in Cork. Overall, the Republican slate was comprised of self-made people from modest social backgrounds, probably a half step down the social ladder from the Redmondite opponents. They faced long-standing political figures in the city, many with considerable economic clout. In the 1920 municipal election, Redmondites rebranded themselves as Irish nationalists, ran 34 candidates, and secured 13 seats, down from 33 in the previous election. 19 independents ran, but only 2 were elected. A new formation of business interests called the Commercial Party ran 14 candidates and secured 4 seats, one of them by brewer Dickie Beamish, whose politics were unionists, as were of the councillor Sir John Scott. Constitutional nationalist trade union officials ran 10 candidates under an Irish Labour banner and returned 3. Finally, a new ex-soldiers political party ran 21 candidates, with 3 elected. The Ex-Soldiers Federation did not allow officers to join their organization and self-identified as a working class and trade unionist body. The Federation later evolved into the Cork Independent Ex-Servicemen's Club, which built the War Monument on the South Mall. So in this chamber 100 years ago, the newly elected councillors included committed Republicans, radical trade unionists, moderate trade unionists, constitutional nationalists, unionists, and ex-servicemen. It was more socially representative than any previous council and reflected a breakthrough in popular democracy in Ireland. Among the Sinn Féin councillors was the first woman elected to the chamber, Anne Sutton. She was a 45-year-old progressive Republican who narrowly missed being elected alderman in the Northeast Ward, and she served on the body until 1924. Sutton was the only woman to stand for Sinn Féin in 1920, or indeed for any party. Cork's coming on at this stage was well organized but riven with a major internal division. The organization later secured a seat for Mary McSweeney in the 1921 general election. Sinn Féin was committed to giving women limited democratic representation, especially compared to other political parties of the period, but it failed to offer an equal voice in the national and local governance. 100 years ago this evening, the Cork Corporation voted to elect Tomás McCurtain as Lord Mayor. From the outset, McCurtain voiced Sinn Féin's new priorities and approaches to government. Beyond declaring allegiance to the Dáil and raising the tricolour, the council also essentially abolished the office of High Sheriff. That honorary position was approved by the King's representative in Ireland, the Lord Lieutenant, and so out it went. Sinn Féin also rejected a motion by a constitutional nationalist councillor to raise the Lord Mayor's salary from £600 to £1,000. Instead, Republicans rejected this and lowered the mayor's salary by £100. At McCurtain's suggestion, the new council also moved corporation meetings from the afternoon to the evenings to facilitate attendance by working class councillors. In his acceptance speech, McCurtain also supported the Cork Corporation's unionist councillors, declaring, quote, they were entitled to representation in the government of the affairs of this country. The following week, he made a mayoral visit to the Church of Ireland bishop. So what we see with this Republican corporation, they were trying, in the words of UCC professor and councillor Alfred O'Reilly, quote, to show that idealists could also be practical administrators. McCurtain's selection as Lord Mayor carried a further symbolic meaning. He was both an alderman of this council and the commander of the Cork No. 1 Brigade of the Irish Republican Army, or IRA. So this election reflected the intersection between the armed and unarmed wings of the Irish independence movement, which were mutually supporting. A month before his election, McCurtain authorized IRA attacks on 3 local police barracks. He was no pacifist, neither was his successor, Terence McSweeney, who also carried on this dual role as Lord Mayor and IRA commander. The Republicans' 2-track strategy was effective but dangerous. Within 2 months, Tomás McCurtain was assassinated in his home by members of the Royal Irish Constabulary, following the killing by the IRA of a police constable. A few months after that traumatic event, McCurtain's close friend and successor, Terence McSweeney, died on hunger strike. City Hall acted as a center for popular protest and mourning throughout this long hunger strike in Cork Men's Jail and Brixton Prison. And in December of that momentous year of 1920, Cork City Hall was burned to the ground by members of the Auxiliary Division of the Royal Irish Constabulary during the burning of Cork. By that time, Cork City had become synonymous with determined and violent opposition to British governance in Ireland. And to the forces of the Crown, these chambers embodied that resistance. As Jerry White and Pat Poland have shown, the burning of this structure was quite deliberate, as it had been targeted on prior occasions. The public stances and loyalty of this body and the tricolour which flew from its City Hall were perceived as a provocation to the forces of the Crown. Yet neither the bullets that killed Tomás McCurtain nor the flames that consumed this structure could alter the march towards independence, which took a decisive turn on this site 100 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Fiona Buckley from the Department of Government and Politics in UCC. Fiona will speak about women in the 1920 election, notable women in Cork City Council, how local government experience is so vital for women's candidature emergency for national politics. Fiona.
Thank you. Lord Mayor, councillors, members of the Oireachtas, Chief Executive, distinguished guests and members of the public. It is a great honour to be invited to address you on this special occasion, and I thank you for the opportunity. The 1920 local elections marked a pivotal transitional moment in the revolutionary period in Ireland. As we've heard, these elections were a platform used by Republicans to defy British control. As also noted this evening, it was the first time that the PRSTV electoral system was rolled out nationally, facilitating fairer representation of the multiplicity of interests evident in the changing political landscape of the time. The 1920 local elections were also important from the point of view of women, who used their well-earned franchise to vote and stand for election in considerable numbers. However, the story of women and local government in Ireland predates 1920. 1899 saw the first local elections in Ireland following the passage of the 1898 Local Government Ireland Act, and it was the first time Irish women meeting certain property qualifications could stand and vote in an election. Women's candidacy, however, was limited to town commissions, boards of guardians, and rural and urban district councils, and it would seem even this was too much for some to handle. Speaking in the House of Lords, the 5th Viscount Clifton, a man called Leopold Agar Ellis, formerly a Member of Parliament for Kilkenny, complained that he did not like to see spouting women out of their place and doing men's work. Also concerned about the influence of Roman Catholic teachings on women, Viscount Clifton argued that the effect of extending the local government suffrage to Irish women would be to largely increase the power of priests on the boards of guardians. Despite, or indeed in spite of Viscount Clifton's concerns, the 1899 local elections returned 31 women district councillors and 85 women as poor law guardians. As Virginia Crossman notes in her book, Local Government in 19th Century Ireland, local government was the scene for some early successes by the Irish suffragist movement. 1911 was the first year Irish women gained the right to contest county and borough councils, a significant stepping stone in the campaign for the extension of the right to vote and stand in national elections, which was granted by the Representation of the People and Parliament Qualification of Women Acts in 1918. Contemporary newspaper accounts of the 1920 local elections, such as those in the Cork Examiner, spoke of the considerable voter turnout, including many women. Queen's University Belfast historian Dr. Margaret Ward outlines that Republican women organised themselves into Cumann Deochtara, a women's group within Sinn Féin, determined to ensure that women would be adequately represented in political and public life. While she notes that feminists associated with the suffrage paper The Irish Citizen encouraged women to come forward as citizens. She also notes that the Irish Women's Franchise League held a model election in order to explain the new voting system, but refused to work with any party that did not select women candidates. The Franchise League urged women not to help any group that had not at least one woman on its ticket. Across the country, women contested the election for Sinn Féin as nationalist candidates and as unionist candidates. Women also ran on an independent Labour platform, as the Labour Party at the time devolved its candidate selection processes to local trade councils and labour bodies, and women were excluded from consideration. It wasn't until 1925 that the Labour Party officially selected female candidates. Interestingly, the manifesto of these independent Labour women mirror many of our present-day issues, including housing concerns and demands for municipal childcare nurseries. Across Ireland, a total of 1,800 seats were up for election in 1920. Women won 42 of those seats, including Anne Sutton of Sinn Féin, representing the North East electoral ward on Cork Corporation. Writing about the corporation's first meeting after the election, my UCC colleague Dr. A. Quinlivan notes that the public gallery was overflowing with many women present. When Thomas McCurtain was elected Lord Mayor, many of those in the chamber rose and cheered him, the men waving their hats and caps and the women handkerchiefs. Cork would have to wait another 39 years before a woman occupied what local historian Antona Callaghan refers to as the highest office in the city. In 1959, Senator Jane Dowdall of Fianna Fáil was elected to the office of Lord Mayor. A Dublin woman by birth, Jane, or Jenny Doggett, moved to Cork following her marriage to Cork businessman and Senator James Dowdall. A nurse by profession, she was appointed to the board of the South Infirmary in 1945 and elected to the Corporation in 1950. In his book, The Lord Mayors of Cork, Anton O'Callaghan notes that Jane Dowdall's trailblazing reputation was not just confined to local government. She was also one of the first women appointed to the Council of State in 1964. In total, 5 women have served in the office of Lord Mayor in Cork. In addition to Jane Dowdall, there was Chrissy O'Hearn of Fianna Fáil in 1989, Deirdre Clune of Fine Gael in 2005, Catherine Clancy of Labour in 2013, and Mary Shields of Fianna Fáil in 2014. The symbolic impact of these women should not be underestimated. Marian Wright Edelman, an American activist for children's rights, once said, "You can't be what you can't see." And this is no truer than in the case of women in politics. Each woman who wears the mayor's chain of office normalises and naturalises women's presence in political office and acts as a role model for others to follow. Yet the fact that just 5 women have worn that chain of office over the past 100 years is an indicator of the very slow pace of cultural change within Irish politics. The presence of women in local council chambers across the country following the 1920 election was a very welcome development. But as coming back to Dr. Margaret Ward's research, as she assesses, it was hardly a fair proportion as claimed by the Irish Independent at the time. The 1920 local elections also set the tone for many of the trends that we see in terms of women's candidacy right up to the present day. Again, referring to Margaret Ward's work, she highlights how the Irish Citizen newspaper criticised the tendency of Republicans to select women because they happen to be relatives of men who have been or are at the foremost of the fight. The paper made it clear that while these women had outstanding qualities that justified their selection, limiting women's candidacy to those who happened to be related to a male public representative was bad and a poor specimen of male logic. The paper asked, how would men like it if we reversed and chose only those whose sisters or aunts or sweethearts had distinguished themselves? As Margaret Ward surmises, this question was ignored, and in doing so, a practice was established whereby for many years an Irish woman's best chance of political office was to be related to a male relative who died while in office. Over the past 100 years, women's political representation at the local level has increased and today stands at a proportion of 24%. However, it is nowhere near gender parity and places Ireland below the EU average of 32% for female representation at the local level. Today, just 1 in every 5 councillors in Cork City Council are women. Localism is an important aspect of Irish politics, and Irish national election studies and RT exit polls on election day consistently find that localness and the ability to look after the needs of one's constituencies are key considerations in voter decision making. Furthermore, local government experience is considered vital if one is to put themselves forward for candidate selection at the national level. It provides individuals with the opportunity to develop key political resources such as local support networks, campaign skills, name recognition and experience. In 2016, some 83% of the 35 women elected to Dáil Éireann were councillors at some stage in their political careers. While women have achieved gender equality with men in terms of voting rights in Ireland, equal access to political office is still an ongoing process. Gender quotas have done much to address the gender imbalance in Irish politics. The implementation of legislative gender quotas for the Dáil elections in 2016 saw a 90% increase in women's candidacy and a 40% increase in the number of women elected. To maintain this progress at the national level, however, it is essential to work towards gender parity at the local level. Given local government is a significant springboard for women wishing to run for Dáil elections, greater efforts must be made by both government and political parties to promote gender balance in local government. If not, the underrepresentation of women in politics will persist and democracy in Ireland will remain unfinished. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you very much for that. We are now 100 years since the first council meeting of the new Republican Council, and now we are remembering those who were elected to Cork Corporation, as it was called at that time. We are asking various individuals to call out the names of members who were elected at that time. And in doing so, we've selected a number of groups to represent that link between the future and the past, between the commitment of people for what they have done 100 years ago, and then looking forward to the future. So we're honoured this evening to have representatives from Cork and Og bridging the gap between the new and the old, to have representatives from 50-50 Women for Election, marking the first time that women got the franchise in Ireland, to have representatives from the trade union movement who played such a key, pivotal role at that period in time, and then also to have representatives from the new communities who have made Ireland their home in the last number of years. We have individuals who have made Ireland, Cork their home, who have come from India, from Poland, from Syria, from Kurdistan, and from El Salvador. And it is noteworthy to remember that 100 years ago, most of these countries were fighting for their independence. In fact, they may not have been deemed countries yet, and some of them are still continuing that struggle. And a lot of them took inspiration from the sacrifices of Tomás McCurtain and Terence McSweeney and so many others. In the post-World War I period, 12 countries in Europe were founded out of the breakup of empire and the struggle for independence. Ireland was the only country that has remained a democracy in that entire time since 100 years ago, and I think it is noteworthy to remember that. And also, I think, just to acknowledge the contribution of the Defence Forces and the public service have played in that continuing to be a democracy. Other countries haven't been so lucky in their public servants and in their Defence Forces, in their commitment to the democracy. So now I'm going to call on a number of the representatives to step forward and to read the names of the first members of the City Council. So with the honour of calling out I'm going to ask the meetings administrator to call out their names. So the representative from Cork and Og.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. Salma Walid.
Professor William Frederick Stockley, James Daly, Anne Sutton, Michael Joseph O'Riordan, John Scott, Sean O'Leary, Sean French. Thank you.
Representing 50-50 Women for Election.
Margaret O'Keefe.
Robert Day, Daniel Horgan, James Thomas Mulligan, Frederick J. Murray, Tig Barry, Patrick Murphy, William F. O'Connor. Thank you.
Representing the trade union movement.
Joe O'Flynn.
Lord Mayor, councillors, can I thank you on behalf of the trade union movement for recognising the significant role that our people have played in the last 100 years, and particularly as General Secretary of SIP2, and which was formerly the Irish Transport and General Workers Union. It's a great pleasure to be asked to participate in tonight's ceremony. James Allen, Thomas Daly, Michael Joseph O'Callaghan, Edmund Collin, Patrick Higgins, John F. O'Sullivan, and Patrick F. O'Sullivan.
Thank you, Joe. Representing the new community groups.
Munira Delan.
Simon Daly, Timothy O'Neill,
Thomas McCartan, Dennis Losey, Gerald Bourne, Michael O'Quail, Thomas Patrick Ford. Thanks.
Faten Al-Natour.
Michael Eken, James Joseph Walsh, Richard F. Beamish, Daniel Campbell, Terence Max Sweeney, Professor Alfred O'Reilly, Thomas Stack. Thank you.
Maritza Aguilera.
William Desmond, Jeremiah Callahan, John Fitzpatrick, William F. O'Connor, Charles Coughlin, John O'Sullivan, John Cronin. Thank you.
Vishwa Thakur.
Son Good, John Horgan, Jeremiah Kelleher, Simon Mahoney, William F. O'Connor, William Russell, John Sheehan.
Wojtek Bajek.
Maurice Walsh, Liam Droste, Edward Fitzgerald, Daniel Barry, Stephen J. O'Riordan, John Desmond, William Ellis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it is noteworthy as an aside that we had the honour of holding Indian Independence Day here in City Hall for the first their National Day for the first time outside Dublin 3 days ago, and they referenced Terence MacSweeney and the writings of Terence MacSweeney as one of their inspirations. We are now proceeding to asking the members to read different extracts from the minutes of the meeting 100 years ago, and also extracts from local newspapers. So I'm going to call out a number of members who have chosen a number of different extracts to read to mark the occasion. It is also very, I think, noteworthy to the minutes that are here in front of me, to see the signatures of the individuals and to see the signature of Thomas McCurtain and the election of Lord Mayor. It's a fascinating account to read and really brings history to life and connects us with that period. So now I call on the first speaker, Councillor Sean Martin.
On January the 15th, 1920, the Cork Examiner of the 2nd of January noted that interest in the election was gathering pace, but with so many varied parties involved, it will be difficult to forecast anything like an approximate result, a difficulty that will be greatly increased by the introduction of a proportional representation system. When nominations closed 3 days later, 165 candidates were in place to contest the 56 seats on the corporation across 7 electoral wards. As election day approached, one very prominent figure in the city was Lord Mayor Alderman William F. O'Connor, who was nominated in 3 separate electoral wards. Playing the publicity game to perfection, the Lord Mayor, representing the Irish Nationalist Party, hosted a fete for 2,000 boys from disadvantaged backgrounds in City Hall on Wednesday, January the 7th. The use of proportional representation by the single transferable vote as the electoral mechanism caused some consternation in the build-up to polling day. The Cork Examiner printed an elector's catechism supplied by the Proportional Representation Society of Ireland.
Thank you. Councillor Joe Kavanagh.
With regard to marking preferences down the ballot paper, it explained, Under proportional representation, a candidate is often able to secure victory at the last minute. He may creep up on the 4th, 5th or later counts, and although very low down on the poll after the early counts, he may find himself victorious before the close. On the day of the elections, Thursday, January the 15th, the Cork Examiner referred to the fact that proportional representation had tempted many parties and interests that under old conditions would have little hope of gaining representation on the council to put forward candidates. The newspaper expressed the wish that the voters will return 56 public-spirited and intelligent men, representing the best in all parties, that will not only not neglect the interests of the city, but will promote and encourage commercial enterprise. Another article reported that 6 men had attacked the Lord Mayor, Alderman William F. O'Connor, on Washington Street the previous night after addressing a meeting of the Discharged and Demobilised Sailors and Soldiers Federation.
Thank you. Councillor Dan Boyle.
Turnout for the elections was reported as about 2/3, including many women. Generally, good order prevailed, but an exception was Grattan Street, where bodies of Sinn Féiners from the country and ex-soldiers came into rather fierce conflict. Revolvers and knives were used, and 3 men were treated in the Mercy Hospital in the late afternoon, one with a bullet wound in the arm. Counting of votes commenced in City Hall at 9:30 a.m. on January 16th. For the next 2 days, the Cork Examiner covered the count in enormous detail, marvelling in the intricacies of the process, as overseen by the Town Clerk, Florence W. McCarthy. The system of election under the Proportional Representation Act brings its most drastic change from the old method. It is a most elaborate procedure. In all areas, the votes have to be scrutinised to see if they are in order and correct. Only such papers go into the account. And when the total has been ascertained, it is divided by the number of vacancies plus 1, and to the quotient is added 1. In this way, the quota is arrived at.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas Gould.
Police presence was high in City Hall, and only the candidates and their agents were allowed to enter the building. By early afternoon, large crowds had gathered outside the municipal headquarters, and the first count was declared by the town clerk in his role as returning officer. It was for the area of Shandon, North West number 2. With 6 vacancies and a total valid poll of 1,748, the quota was 250. Sinn Féin's Eamon Collin and Patrick Higgins both exceeded the quota on the first count and were elected as aldermen. At the conclusion of the count, the city coroner, John J. Horgan, delivered a speech in which he praised the work of the town clerk, Florence W. McCarthy, and all the corporation staff. Coroner Horgan said, "There have been many gloomy predictions as to when the result of the election would be available. We were told that we were not able to do the work at all properly, that Belfast and similar places would wipe us out. It was also said that the count would take weeks, but it would be next Christmas by the time it was delivered."
Thank you. Councillor John Maher.
The work had been completed in 2 days, and Belfast, which had 5 areas to deal with against our 7, and where they had 5 staffs to our 2, took 1.5 days to complete its work. We in Cork have established a record for all Ireland. The town clerk was then lifted in the air and treated to a rousing rendition of "He's a Jolly Good Fellow." The elections in Cork City were a success for Sinn Féin and the transport workers who ran on a combined ticket. In total, they claimed 30 out of the 56 seats available. The outgoing Lord Mayor, William F. O'Connor, was elected in 3 different electoral areas. While this was a triumph for him, he could only accept a seat in one of the areas, meaning that two by-elections would be needed. Sinn Féin and transport workers joined forces in the election, and their combined 30 seats gave them a working majority in City Hall. They also boasted 11 of the corporation's 14 new aldermen, 2 in each ward, with exceptions being James Daly, Irish Nationalist, Richard Beamish, Commercial, and Sir Edward Fitzgerald, Irish Nationalist.
Thank you. Councillor Ted Tynan.
In a Cork Examiner editorial on January 20th, an optimistic tone was struck about the makeup of the new corporation. In a word, it may be said that the new corporation, irrespective of party or other classification, will take a broad outlook and serve the city's interests by helping to make the most of their opportunities in contributing to its commercial and industrial upliftment. It has been said that there is a tide in the affairs of men which, if taken at the flood, leads on to fortune. Cork now stands on the edge of opportunities which, if wisely handled, should bring prosperity to the city and provide an abundance of employment for all classes. Upon her public representatives, much depends. If they be wise, tolerant, progressive and broad-minded, the outlook is full of promise. Attention soon turned to the statutory meeting of the new corporation at which a Lord Mayor would be elected. This was scheduled for Friday, 30th of January, a week later than normal. Half an hour before the start of the meeting, the public galleries were virtually full. By midday, the galleries were completely packed and there was a danger of overcrowding as more and more people tried to make their way into the chamber. Margaret.
Thank you. Councillor Clefin.
The Cork Examiner noted that there were some clergymen present, and perhaps for the first time in the history of this meeting, a large number of ladies were present. When the outgoing Lord Mayor, William F. O'Connor, took the chair, he was greeted by a combination of cheers and hissing from the galleries. Town Clerk Florence W. McCarthy called the roll, and this established that 51 members out of the 56 elected were present. Effectively, the total was 54, due to William F. O'Connor winning seats in 3 separate wards. The Sinn Féin councillors answered the roll call in Irish, and when the name of Alderman Frederick Murray was called, his party colleague, Councillor Michael O'Queill, answered in Gaelic to the effect that Murray was in prison under the lock of the foreigner. A similar situation occurred when the name of Alderman J.J. Walsh was called. It was explained that he was on the run from the foreigner. Chairman of the meeting, William F. O'Connor, then called for nominations for the office of Lord Mayor. Again, it was Councillor Michael O'Queill who spoke, and in Irish, he proposed Alderman Tomás McCurtain, who had topped the poll in Blackpool.
Thank you. Councillor McFinn.
The proposal was seconded by Councillor Terence McSweeney. The chairman asked if there were any other candidates, at which point Sir John Scott, Commercial, unexpectedly rose to speak. With no reference to the mayoralty election, Scott commenced a rambling speech about the necessity of a housing scheme. He was ruled out of order by the chairman, but continued to stand. This led to Alderman Richard Beamish quipping, "He is going to be in order again if you don't be careful. You can't suppress that gentleman." As the chairman tried to get order, Scott sat down, only to immediately stand up again to propose Beamish as Lord Mayor. An indignant Beamish retorted that he was not allowing his name to go forward and that Scott had no permission to nominate him. Labour's Councillor Michael Egan interjected and somewhat threateningly said, If Sir John is going to pursue these tactics for the next 12 months, he had better look out for himself. Keen to get a grip on the meeting, William F. O'Connor declared that, with no other candidate, Alderman Tomás McCurtain was the Lord Mayor of Cork for the coming 12 months. Amid scenes of great excitement, McCurtain made his way to the Lord Mayor's dais at the top of the council chamber. Most of those in the chamber rose and cheered him, the men waving their hats and caps, and the women handkerchiefs.
Councillor Tony Fitzgerald.
The Soldier's Song was called for, and others shouted, "Up Blackpool," as the newly elected Lord Mayor signed the declaration accepting the office. The Soldier's Song was sung. The outgoing Lord Mayor, William O'Connor, congratulated McCurtain on his election and wished him a prosperous year in office. He then presented McCurtain with the mayoral chain amidst a renewal of lusty cheering. The new Lord Mayor then delivered a short but businesslike speech. He thanked William F. O'Connor for his generous remarks and his fellow councillors for unanimously electing him as Lord Mayor of Cork. McCurtain noted with regret that he did not possess the oratory skills of Sir John Scott, but he wanted to take the opportunity to thank the people of his ward who voted for him in large numbers. He declared that his main duty would be to stick to the principles of the Irish Republic and to promote the freedom of the country. In Cork, there are certain issues in relation to the corporation. In the past that we be felt to forget, but there were other things it would be well to emulate.
Thank you. Councillor Damien Boylan.
The new Lord Mayor then challenged his fellow elected members to put the interests of their communities before anything else. He said that all of them would have to put forward their best efforts to improve and advance the citizens' prosperity, adding, "The people do not want speeches. They want the work done and with as little froth as possible. In doing our work, the people expect from us a sacrifice of time and a sacrifice, perhaps, of personal interest." The motto of the year ahead would be self-reliance, efficiency and economy. The Lord Mayor concluded his acceptance speech by highlighting an issue that was very dear to his own heart, the Irish language. He was delighted to hear it used during the meeting, and he hoped that future meetings of the corporation would preserve a bilingual attitude. In time, it was his wish that Cork Corporation would completely conduct its business in the language of the country. The next business of the meeting was to fix the Lord Mayor's salary for the year ahead. Councillor Michael Joseph O'Riordan proposed a salary of £1,000, and his motion was seconded by Councillor Daniel Gamble. Both councillors were members of the Irish Nationalist Party.
Thank you. Councillor Lorna Bogue.
In response, Lord Mayor McCurtain told the meeting, "Personally, I don't think I will take a motion because I don't think we should start off the new era with that salary." His Sinn Féin colleague, Professor Alfred O'Rahilly, recommended a salary of £500, remarking, "We in Sinn Féin are often charged with being impractical idealists, but that does not prevent us from being practical administrators. We consider that £500 is a sufficient salary considering the conditions and difficulties with which we are confronted." Lord Mayor McCurtain called on this recommendation to be agreed, and accordingly it was unanimously passed that his salary for the year would be £500. Tomás McCurtain then took centre stage. Under Lord Mayor's privilege, he brought a special motion before the elected members, pledging the Council's allegiance to Dáil Éireann. The Lord Mayor proclaimed that a little over 12 months ago, the Irish people at the general election declared by an overwhelming majority for an Irish Republic and elected 73 representatives pledged to that declaration.
Thank you. Councillor Kenneth Collins.
Lord Mayor McCurtain said, "The people at the recent elections to the local bodies ratified the decision of the general election. It is now up to those bodies to pledge their allegiance to the government set up by the representatives of the country." The motion was formally read by Alderman Liam Oireachtas and seconded by Councillor Terence McSweeney. The Oireachtas forcefully ended his speech by saying, "In our minds and souls, we recognise that there is only one lawful authority in the country, Dáil Éireann and its executive." I propose the resolution as the expression of opinion of the overwhelming majority of the people of this ancient city. In seconding the motion, Terence McSweeney argued that the machinery of the British government was not being used for peace in Ireland. The police are not doing their duties of officers of the peace. They are watching my house, the Lord Mayor's house, and the houses of our friends. They are only considering when the great roundup will begin. This is a very serious matter for those claiming to be advocates of the law and order.
Thank you. Councillor Terry Shannon.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. In a dramatic ending to his contribution, McSweeney declared, "I am quite convinced that the God of nations will stand by the David of nations and strike down Goliath. I am satisfied that we are well established our republic on foundations that will endure forever." Sir John Scott argued that the motion was not permitted without notice in accordance with the Corporation's bylaws. This was rejected by McCurtain, who stressed that he was entitled to bring the motion forward under the privileges afforded the Lord Mayor. Professor Alfred O'Rahala supported the Lord Mayor, directing his comments to Sir John Scott, "In God's name, where are your brains? There has been 5 years of notice of motion for this." Alderman Richard Beamish then delivered an impassioned speech saying that all councillors were animated with love of their country and anxious for the advancement of their city. Over the years, he had fought to keep the corporation clear of all political questions and matters. The motion brought forward today is not agreeable to my line of thought. I sincerely hope for an honourable solution to this desperate tangle, the Irish question.
Thank you. Councillor Mary Rose Desmond.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Councillor William F. O'Connor, who had begun the evening as the Lord Mayor, contributed to the debate by stating, "I would have to consider myself a Sinn Féiner if I subscribed to this motion. I am not prepared to consider myself a Sinn Féiner." A person in the public gallery shouted out, "We don't want you." And when O'Connor tried to continue his speech, he was drowned out by a chorus of hissing. After order was restored, O'Connor defiantly noted, "You gentlemen are out for the freedom of Ireland. I wish you Godspeed on your venture. I am also sure that those responsible leaders of your party will see to it that the minority here will get freedom of speech. I don't see why, when I open my mouth, why I should be hissed if there is going to be toleration shown. When I was Lord Mayor, I allowed no member of the council to be insulted, and I am sure Lord Mayor McCurtain will see to it that no man is denied the freedom of speech here." At the end of a lengthy debate with contributions by many councillors, the motion pledging allegiance to Dáil Éireann was put to a vote and passed by the Sinn Féin majority.
Thank you. Councillor Deirdre Ford.
Thank you, Ard Mayor. The winning margin was 30 votes to 11. At the conclusion of the meeting, Lord Mayor McCurtain was presented with a Sinn Féin rosette by a member of the Cork branch of Commemoration. The new Lord Mayor then watched as the Sinn Féin flag was hoisted at high mast over City Hall. As he celebrated with his family and friends, the Lord Mayor McCurtain had no idea of what the future would bring. Sacrifice had been a theme of his acceptance speech, and within a few short months, he would make the ultimate sacrifice for his beliefs. The composition of the new Cork Corporation was, however, not complete. With William F. O'Connor having won seats in 3 electoral wards, 2 by-elections were required. O'Connor was elected in the Northwest electoral area number 1, the Central area and the South area number 1. He chose to take his seat for the Northwest ward, thus creating vacancies in the other 2. a deadline of the 25th of February was set for nominations for the 2 by-elections. The vacant seat in the central area went to Barry Egan. There was only one nominee for the South Area number 1. Donald O'Callaghan was now a member of the council, though he would have to wait until the 11th of March to be formally ratified. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank all the councillors for their contribution to give a historical context of the time and a feeling for the commitment that the councillors from 100 years ago gave to the country. And it is so great to see so many of their family members here with such pride in their contribution to Irish history. Following the election of 1918, Sinn Féin members refused to acknowledge the British Parliament at Westminster and instead moved to establish an Irish Parliament, Dáil Éireann, a move which was obviously strenuously resisted by the British Crown, essentially forcing the Dáil to go underground. After the local elections of 1920, Cork Corporation took the historical decision to become the first democratic forum to recognise the legitimacy of the Dáil, when proposed by Alderman Liam de Rochta and seconded by Councillor Terence McSweeney, the following motion was approved. That this council of the County Borough of Cork, at its first meeting after election in 1920, hereby records its recognition of Dáil Éireann as the lawful, legal and constitutional Parliament of the Irish nation, and recognises the executive of the Dáil as the lawful government of this country. Thank you. Just finally, I would just like to thank everyone for their support and help in organising this meeting, particularly the officials here in City Council, Anna, Paul, Nikki and everyone involved. I'd like to thank all the members and all the people who've given up their time this evening, and all my fellow councillors, and especially the dignitaries who've taken the time to travel and come here this evening, but a special warm welcome to the family representatives who have a strong connection with this period of history and who have given so much to Ireland and to Cork's history. We will finish the meeting by, I'd ask you all to stand where Sean O'Shea will sing Aron Naveen.
I'd just like to explain that I'm singing at the request tonight the Soldier's Song, because at the time Aron Naveen was not translated, or the Soldier's Song was not translated, and also I'll sing the verse and chorus as was the practice at the time. We'll sing you a song, a soldier's song, with cheering, rousing chorus, as round our blazing fires we throng, the starry heavens o'er us, impatient for the coming fight. And as we wait the morning's light, here in the silence of the night, we'll chant a soldier's song. Soldiers are we, who fought and died for Ireland. Some have come from a land beyond the wave, sworn to be free. Now more our ancient Ireland shall shelter the despot or the slave. Tonight we'll band a barn a boil in Erin's cause come woe our weal, mid cannons roar and rifles peal. We'll chant
Thank you. And just to conclude, there's refreshments outside, and if members would like to come down and look at the minutes from 100 years ago and take photos, they're more than welcome. I'd like to conclude the meeting now. Thank you.